Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Saudi Arabia or Jeddah post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this race? Did you think it was exciting? Did you think it was boring? Did you think Stroll's wreck gave it the extra element that you were looking for? Or did it kind of fade out a little bit too soon? Did Berman coming from F2 and replacing Sainz help you out? Did it give you that extra edge to see if you could actually get points or possibly even in the top 5? For me, I thought it was a fairly boring race. Yes, those things added some elements, but it wasn't enough to make this overall race a really exciting race. You pretty much got into lines and you were basically trying to fight forward. There was not a lot of passing, especially near the front. The back kind of got backlogged, with K-Mag pushing everybody backwards. And the front was kind of like sitting in those lines trying to see if they could actually outlast the other person. So it didn't really add that extra element that I was looking for. But what was your thoughts? I will go through the order from last to first and give you my thoughts on how each driver did and possibly what happened to them during this race, if I know. So without further ado, we will start off with Pierre Gasly. Now, he started complaining on the sighting lap that his gearbox was having issues, but was able to get it back into that first and try to start the race off on that normal start. But then was basically called into the pits basically right after the start. So he ended up basically not making a full lap on this race. And that's a shame because I would like to see how he would have ended up with his teammate Ocon in this race. So he was pretty much out right away. And then we come to Lance Stroll, who qualified in 10th and was going around fairly decently, but on lap 6, clipped the inside of the wall with his left front tire, breaking the steering and the suspension on that, making him slide all the way across into the barriers on the other side of the track, and basically causing that safety car issue where basically everyone came in on lap 7 and switched tires for their one and only pit stop. Now, Valtteri Bottas did actually make a 2 pit stop strategy, but he really wasn't into the contention here. As you can see, he basically came in 17th overall, so it wasn't really his idea of a perfect race either. Most people started off on mediums and then switched to hards on that lap 7 pit stop. A few people switched from softs that they started on, like Oliver Behrman and Valtteri Bottas are the 2 people that I have that actually started off on softs. Everybody else started off on mediums, so there was not a lot of pit stop strategy issues. Yes, it kind of made it exciting for that one pit stop because everyone was coming in, and so you had to watch behind you when you were going through the pits to see who was coming in and be delayed on your out because other people were coming in, or trying to get that extra edge to get out in front of the person that you were pitting in line with. So that gave it a little bit of element early on, but then pretty much after that, it kind of stagnated into this same pattern. And so we can see Juan Yuzhou is one of those that basically stayed out, and he stayed out till lap 41 on those medium tires, and then switched to softs. And, of course, Stake F1 had a horrible pit stop and had issues again with the front right lug nut. And so it took him a long time to get back out in the pit. So he basically came back out in last place after that bad pit stop, after him lasting so long on those first medium tires that he was on. So that basically killed his race and ended up a lap down. Valtteri Bottas, as I said, had not a great start. He lost a position on the first lap of the race and was on those soft tires, which you'd think would have the better grip on those. So he didn't take advantage of those, then switched to hard tires that he went to lap 34 with, and then switched back to a soft set of tires and didn't get very far. So he basically lost a position after qualifying 16th. He ended up in 17th overall. And, of course, with Stroll going out, that kind of put them in a bad spot because everyone else was trying to, juggle around for that 10th position that they could get that last point for the constructor standings. And so that's where most of the backfield were trying to strive for, is that 1 point. And with Stake F1 being so far back in the pack and not doing what they need to do, having trouble in the pit stops for Juan Yu Zhou caused them to be at the very back of the pack. Daniel Ricciardo, I didn't see a whole lot from him. He did lose a spot at the very beginning of the race on lap 1, as I said, and then the next time I saw anything from him on the screens was lap 49, where he was back there trying to gain ground and then spun by himself and then had to pull back on, losing time and ground to Logan Sargent, who was ahead of him. So we didn't see a whole lot from Daniel. It looked like a pretty horrible race for him, his standpoint, in regards to the rest of the field. Getting just stuck there behind Logan and not being really able to gain ground or pass them on the track themselves. So they have some work to do on that RB. Now we come to Logan Sargent, who qualified in 19th, having a horrible qualifying session. Worked his way up to 15th. So he had a decent race, even though Albon, his teammate, was up into 11th. So he has some work to do to kind of get on terms with his teammate. Of course, his teammate did start up a little bit farther up in the grid. I don't have a whole lot for Logan. He was kind of stuck in that train. Again, that Kevin Magnussen was kind of backing up the field, so he's fighting Yuki a little bit and trying to fight Daniel a little bit of Ocon as well, as Ocon was kind of coming back through the field in that pit stop strategy as well. So not a great race, but just a horrible race for Logan Sargent, ending up a lap down. Yuki qualified in 9th, and I'm sure he was hating this race, as he was one of the few that was up in the front running, and then was just trying to fight and ended up getting back and forth quite a bit with Kevin Magnussen. And then once he got passed by Ocon in that running after he made a run on Kevin, and Kevin was able to pull him back out, that position back out, let open the door for Esteban Ocon to pass him, and then he was having to fight that Alpine, which was not very good to start off with in that running. So I'm sure he was having a really horrible day in this running. He did lose a position on the start of the race, so he didn't have the greatest start as well. So going back to 10th and then just kind of having to fight those people as they were coming back through the field, and then losing ground to Kevin Magnussen, and then Kevin putting, the very aggressive, defense on him really hurt his race overall, in my view. Ocon actually did a pretty good job in that Alpine, because I don't think that Alpine's actually able to do a whole lot with. Qualified 17th, ended up in 13th. I have him passing Yuki on lap 29 for that 13th position. As I said, when he was fighting Kevin Magnussen in that running, he was able to find that opening and get past him, and then basically he was stuck behind Kevin Magnussen for the rest of the race, where he couldn't quite find the way around Kevin, and Kevin was putting up the major defense at that point because of his time penalties that he was given, and that kind of hurt the rest of the field behind him as they were trying to push that gap. So that comes to Kevin, who actually qualified in 13th and ended up in 12th. So that's actually a plus, even though he would probably win in that 11th spot, besides his time penalties that he got. And that's kind of an issue for this track, because it seemed like their penalties were a little heavy when they were giving them out and a little light when they weren't giving them out. So there was a penalty for Kevin Magnussen for causing a collision with Albon when he was going around and didn't give Albon enough room on the outside, and kind of caused that collision between Albon and Ocon, and then K-Mag, and it tore up some of his, flooring in that process. And on top of that, he ended up getting another 10-second penalty for when he was trying to fight with Yuki Tsunoda, going on the outside and gaining an advantage from going off the track. And in the past, both of those that they were, at least that the announcers that I saw were reviewing, said that those were both 5-second penalties in the past. So that's kind of hefty in regards to penalties, having a 20-second penalty. kind of put him out of the top running for those point runnings, but he did a magnificent job, in my view, of being the team player and holding up the rest of the field so that his teammate could do that pit stop and get back out in running for that 10th and final point position. So a really good job on the team side of things for Kevin Magnussen, and a bad job for his own race in regards to being just a little bit too aggressive and getting into issues where he was causing some issues for himself with penalties. And they just happened to be hefty penalties, so that kind of just threw everything out for the wash. He did actually finish in the 11th, and he just dropped back a place because of the lapped cars. In my view, I think that's what they ended up saying, was that it didn't drop him back through the field quite that much. So it was lucky on him as well on that regard for those penalties. Even though they were hefty, they didn't cause him quite as much effort as they thought they were going to when they first received those. Alex Albon came in 11th after qualifying in 12th. So he gained a position as well. So he did a decent job. He, again, didn't have a very good start, lost a position, so he had to gain that position and another position on the way. He got hit with K-Mag on lap 10. So that kind of put some damage on his vehicle, and then had to push him back through the field a little bit to get back into the running. I have him passing Yuki on lap 33rd for 14th, and Ocon on lap 44 for 12th. And then he ended up back into that 11th spot because of Guan Yu Zhou having to drop back after pitting, dropping to the back of the field, bumping him up into that 11th position, which is kind of the horrible position to be in because it's just outside of points, and that's where you're really trying to fight for when those back teams. So good race for him, even though it didn't really look like it in regards to not getting points. And generally, pretty good running. This leads us to the top 10, where we have Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified in 15th and ended in that 10th position. He was basically fighting alongside of Behrman, and was able to get that 9th position on lap 19, and then dropping back because of the way things worked out. Not quite the car that they need in Haas to really push for those front-running groups, with the Mercedes and McLarens and Ferraris and possibly even the Aston Martins. I think we're in that top group that they're really having to struggle with to get close to. So I think he did a really good job of taking advantage of Stroll getting knocked out of this race and taking that last point position for him. Lewis Hamilton says they really need a lot of work done on that Mercedes after really struggling along in that car. He was basically in that position for the most of the race. He didn't gain or lose any positions on the start of the race. And, of course, he started off on mediums, and he was one of the few people that stayed out when Stroll wrecked. And so he came back in on lap 36 for his lap and brought him back down in the field where he could not actually fight Norris in that running. They were going pretty quick, and so they thought both of them were going to try to catch Oliver Behrman, but they kind of ran out of juice on those soft tires so that they weren't able to take the advantage to get past into those top positions. So for both Lewis and Lando Norris, they kind of went long, and so Lando pitted on lap 37, whereas Lewis boxed on 36. So it was just like a lap apart, and Lando was able to get out in front of Lewis from his pit stop, which helped him in that regard, and then he was able to fight off Lewis from taking over that 8th position. And they were trying to fight to get into that 7th position, but were not quite able to gain the ground that they were hoping to at the end of the race. I know Lando was saying that those soft tires were kind of running away from him fairly quickly, and he was not able to get the speed that he was looking for, those soft tires that he was hoping for at least. So that was good. Lando did get a black and white flag for weaving on the straights, keeping Lewis Hamilton behind him. So he came close to getting a penalty himself and letting Lewis by him on those straightaways. And some of that was warranted, some of that wasn't. I think the first time, Lewis was far enough away that he probably didn't need to do that. I know he was trying to break the toe on those straightaways, or really trying to keep that position. He did keep it, so that's, I guess, a good strategy if that worked out for him without actually getting the penalty, without losing too much ground. But overall, not the best day for Lando, but a good recovery from trying a different strategy and not playing out as well as they would have liked. So a decent run, and of course the McLaren split that strategy, kind of like the Mercedes did, and so one side lost and one side gained from that strategy. So not too bad, as I said, but not the best that they were hoping for, and it kind of hurt them on that, going long on that strategy, hoping for another yellow flag or safety car to come out to really boost them into that front running positions. And at one point, of course, everybody pitted, and so Lando was actually leading the race. So that was kind of interesting to have Lando lead the race, even though it was more based on because he didn't pit where everybody else did. But that was kind of neat to have him actually lead a race this year. This leads us to the man of the hour, Oliver Bearman, who qualified 11th and ended up in 7th. He did a phenomenal job in my view. He was only able to come in on FP3, and part of that was shortened because of Juan Yujo's wreck. So he only got like a lap or two on the softs as well before he had to qualify. And having this race is a high-speed race, kind of high G in some areas as well, really showed that he was up to the task, and he was able to get points, and was actually able to really do an excellent job of, fighting over those front running positions, gaining ground, even though he wasn't at the front of the race to start off with, and get as many points as possible, helping Ferrari in their constructor standings as well. So I think Oliver did an excellent job, and I hope to see him in F1 next year, which is kind of interesting because we seem to get a lot more drivers than there are going to be seats, so we'll have to see how that plays out. Next comes George. George qualified in 7th and went to 6th, so he actually gained a position overall, so that's good. He passed Hulkenberg on lap 14 for 8th position, and then was able to get up there mainly because of Lando and Lewis dropping back after their pit stops. So he kind of was up there in the running, but not to the top field of that area. So he was struggling a little bit in that Mercedes, and so that Mercedes has a little bit of work to do in regards, but I think he got the most out of that Mercedes that he possibly could. If you have any other suggestions that you have insight into for George, I'd love to hear it, because he was right at that edge for me in that Mercedes, gaining ground on Alonso, but not quite enough that he really needed to get by him. And of course, Alonso is that crafty person, so it's hard to really get by him if he doesn't want you to. And if you don't have the delta for the cars to really shine as well. So that kind of showed on Fernando's view, where he qualified in 4th and ended up in 5th. So he dropped back a position, but I think he would be happy with that position overall, as he really fought fairly hard for that position, even though it really doesn't show on paper or on the screen because they didn't show Alonso a lot. He was basically just ahead of George and kind of behind Oscar in his battles around that circuit, not being able to gain a whole lot of ground, but able to, maintain that position overall. I don't have a whole lot of information from him on regards to if he was really super struggling, but I know that Aston Martin's not doing the greatest job currently. but was able to at least get into that 5th position, which is a good point position for him and Aston Martin. This leads us to Oscar Piastri, who qualified in 5th and ended up in 4th, so he gained some ground, doing a good job. I have him, doing a fairly decent job, passing Alonso, I think, on lap 20 for 6th, and Hamilton took 5th from Hamilton when Hamilton pitted. So that was a fairly good run for Oscar. Keeping his pace, keeping his tires in line on those hard tires after he switched on, that lap 7, going the rest of the field on those hard tires, and not really overusing them and getting backed up into Alonso, where Alonso had the ability to pass him. So he's learning, and he's doing a good job, and came away with some really good points for McLaren, and they said they had split their strategy, so he's the one of those that boxed on lap 7, whereas Lando didn't and had to wait and hope for a safety car or something in the end of the race, which never did happen. So that kind of caused Lando to drop behind Oscar during that race. But overall, I think Oscar did a really good job in this, which leads us to Charles Leclerc, who ended up in 3rd. He dropped a position from 2nd. He did gain the fastest lap, so he gains a point for that, so that's good, kind of minimizing the points as much as possible. He did pass Hamilton on lap 15 for 4th, and passed Norris on lap 27 for 3rd, and basically ended up in that 3rd position for the rest of the race. Pretty big gap between him and Sergio, and there was a pretty decent gap between him and Oscar as well. So he was kind of had a lonely race in that regard, but enough to get into that podium position, which is good to see for Ferrari to keep that pressure on Red Bull as much as possible in this race, even though the Red Bulls seem to be running away with it. And of course, we have Sergio Perez, one of those Red Bulls, and who qualified in 3rd and gained to 2nd. He had a good start and almost passed Leclerc on the start of the race, but Leclerc was able to hold him off at the start of the race, so it took him a little while, like lap 4, before he was able to get past Leclerc and get into that 2nd position. And he passed Norris on lap 18 for that 2nd position later on after that pit stop. He did get a 5-second penalty for an unsafe release, which didn't really matter for him during this run, because he had the gap between him and Charles Leclerc easily to match that. So a good run for Sergio, getting into that 2nd position fairly quickly off the start of the race, and then maintaining that. And even though his teammate was got a little bit farther ahead than he wanted, I think it's still a good run for Serge, and to really show what he can do. Hopefully he can show that he is still willing to and eligible for that seat at Red Bull, and which is coveted by so many as well. So good run for Sergio Perez in that regard. And of course, this leads us to the race winner, Max Verstappen, who qualified in 1st and took the 1st as well. So that's another almost hat trick, because he didn't quite get fastest lap. So that kind of dropped it down, which I think is probably my one and only hope for this season, in that even though he didn't even have the fastest lap going into the last lap, he didn't actually have the ability to gain that, as George had the fastest lap for the longest time, and then Charles Leclerc was able to pull it back from himself on that very last lap. But to say that, it's hard to, fault Max in anything that he did today. He did pass Norris on lap 13, back for that lead after he pitted and Lando stayed out. So that was kind of the one and only pass that he really had to make during this, besides lap cars. And just to show you, he had a 2.2 lead by lap 7 and a 6.7 second lead by lap 25, an 8.5 second lead on lap 40, And at the very end, he had an 8.67 second lead for the full win. So he had a decent gap between him and Perez, his teammate. But I guess he didn't have enough in those tires left over to really press to get that fastest lap like he probably would have wanted. So in regard to that, I think Max did an excellent job. Of course, Oliver Behrman got the driver of the day. So who would you vote for the driver of the day if it wasn't Oliver Behrman? That's kind of a hard decision. Would have been K-Mag, even though he had penalties for holding up the field and letting his teammate get that 10th and final position. Would have been, Fernando Alonso for really being able to handle that Aston Martin and stay into that 5th position, or to be, someone else in the field. You can leave those in the comments too if you want. But at this point, if you like what you've seen, I would appreciate a like. And if you want to see more of this, I would suggest that you subscribe as well. This leads us to the constructors or driver standings. I get ahead of myself. And we see lots of movement. Of course, it's the only second race of the season, so we get a lot of movement in this regarding. So starting at the back, poor Pierre Gasly ends up in that 21st position, not making it a lap. So he dropped back in to the back of the field with 0 points. Valtteri Bottas is just ahead of him, dropping back into the 20th position. Logan Sargent gains a position, so he's in that 19th position, even with 0 points. Yuki loses a position. Esteban Ocon actually stays where he was from last week, so that's in that 17th position. And then you have Daniel, Kevin, and Juan Yuzhou dropping back into those positions. Alex Albon moving up. Then we finally get into the points with Lance Stroll, who didn't gain any extra points this time because of that wreck, dropping back down to 12th, where Nico Hülkenberg gains that 11th position with that 1 point he was able to get today. And then we have the nice surprise of Oliver Behrman jumping in on the field at 10th, which is outstanding. And of course, it's kind of funny because he is not even had that many points in his F2 season so far. So he is ahead of himself in the F2 running with this one race up behind him, which is pretty cool to see. But then we end up having to not see him for the season, so probably watch him fall a little bit in this regard. He probably won't fall to the back, but he will fall a little bit, I think, hopefully, with Stroll being able to race a lot more in this field. I think he's going to gain those points and overtake Oliver. Then we have Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris dropping back as they didn't get any points. Fernando Alonso jumping up to 7th. Carlos Sainz dropping back to 6th because he wasn't able to race, where Oscar Piastri and George and Charles Leclerc bumping up into that 3rd, 4th, and 5th position, with Sergio staying where he was, and of course Max Verstappen staying in that 1st place with 51 points. So early in the season, and of course pretty much the 0 point running from 13 down to 21st will change drastically race by race, as whoever ends up on top basically ends up in that running position where they are going to have to fight for the points. So Nico has a little bit of edge over the back of the field, where Lance Stroll probably will gain at least a few more points to go up ahead of him throughout this season. Now you may gain the extra point here and there depending on if you have any more issues of people dropping out because of wrecks or reliability issues with their vehicles. So there's always a chance to get a little bit more points and changing up that back of the field. So now we're on to constructor standings, and basically we have Alpine staying at the rear of the field with 0 points. And just ahead of them is RB Honda and Stake F1, and then Williams all with 0 points, and then Haas gaining that 1 point, so jumping up to 6th. And then we have Aston Martin at 13 points. Mercedes dropping back to 4th behind McLaren with 26, and with McLaren getting ahead of them with 28 points now. And then Ferrari in 2nd position with 49, And we have Red Bull, of course, in that first position with 87 points. So what is coming up next? We have Australia on March 24th, and that's the Melbourne circuit with a length of 3.28 miles. So we'll be running 58 laps on this circuit for a total race distance of 190.217 miles. And we have Sergio Perez in 2023 with the lap record of 1 minute 20.235 seconds. And it was first introduced in 1996. So we'll see if we can get close to that lap record this coming weekend. And this is back to a Sunday. So we'll back onto a Sunday circuit race. So no more Saturdays for the time being. Back in our normal scheduled race order of practice sessions on Friday, qualifying on Saturday, and race on Sunday. So until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.